Go live?
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. Hey, everyone. It's Victoria and Gabe at Super Awesome Cool Pottery. And we are just getting set up for Inktober Day 21. Gabe will be inking in his cool drawing for sleep. Right now, he's just sharing our YouTube link and our Facebook link with his friends. In the background, you can hear our artist Emily is teaching a clay hand building class to a family. You all are welcome to come to our studio in Orlando, Florida. Super awesome, cool pottery. And Gabe now is going to be using, go ahead, Gabe, and show them your cool tools.
All right.
All right.
This is my ink pen. It's my ink dropper. So these are actually called dip pens. Instead of using like a ballpoint pen, which already has the ink cartridge inside of it, these are just pens that have a nib, sort of like what I've got here. And they have a handle. Typically, you can dip these into the ink, but I use the eyedropper so that I don't get the whole pen incredibly messy. That's just a personal preference. Both work. I am also using a dirty rag because ink will stain. It will stain your clothes. I have ruined my clothes doing this before. It is not fun. It makes everybody very sad. We don't like that very much. So I'm going to go ahead and start inking the best I can. Now, the one thing that I need to do while I am drawing this is be sure that I don't overload my pen. What I usually do, and what I didn't do this time, is find a sheet of scrap paper and just go ahead and test my pen on that sheet of scrap paper. This helps me figure out, do I have too much ink on the paper? You can see that I've got blobs and dots from past tests. Those blobs happen when I've got too much ink on the paper. I'm also doing this to make sure that the nib itself doesn't have any oils left on the nib. If there's oils on the nib, then the ink is not going to flow. Another thing to keep in mind while you're inking is you don't want to push the pen. So I can't push like that. I always pull, because if I push, I run the risk of splattering the ink absolutely everywhere and making a huge mess and possibly bending and breaking my nib. And these things are not exactly, the cheapest. Although I did go ahead and only purchase the cheapest nibs that were in the store because I'm a college student. You know how that is. So, with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start. Hands are always the hardest, so I'm starting with the hands here just because I have such a hard time with them that I wind up wanting to do these first just to get it out of the way. I do not like having to deal with hands. Feet are my second least favorite, but hands first. Now, the thing to keep in mind with your ink pen is that because it is a dip pen, it doesn't have this cartridge here. You have to keep in mind how much ink. Oh, cool, I've got ink on my finger. How much ink is on the nib and how much ink you have left to work with. So if you run out of ink, then you got to go ahead and start again. I'm going to try and clean myself off a little bit. That's another thing to keep in mind is where the ink is on your pen. What I did is I put a little too much ink, flowed backwards, and now there's ink all over my hands. Hopefully that'll wash off in the bathroom today. But, I'm open. Maybe I'll just have a new tattoo. You know how that is. Let's test it. There we go. Ink is flowing. This is something that takes a lot of patience. And you also, when you're drawing, have to have to know exactly what you want your drawing to look like towards the end. If you don't have a very good image of what you want your drawing to look like, the final product, then inking will wind up being pretty messy. One of the difficult things about inking when you're doing so professionally is that the person who sketches and the person who draws are not always the same person. So you have to have really good, clear communication, especially if you're doing comic art. If you're the same person, if you are just one person doing comic art, then it's not that big of a deal. You're usually all right. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the other hand. Now, the other reason that I'm doing the hands first is because they're kind of a focal point here. I've got the hands and the head and the curve of the body. Those are all the main things that I want the eye to focus on. So I also want to add the most detail and the most attention to all these areas. Otherwise, they're not going to be all that pretty. And either the eye of my viewer does not focus on them, or it does, and the viewer is just like, ew, you know, just how that is. Another thing to keep in mind is the size of the hands and the head. Usually, the size of the head determines the size of the hands. It can be a little bit, up in the air. It can be a little bit variant. Some people have smaller hands, some people have bigger hands. But it's a general guide to keep in mind. It's called proportion. Now, because I want my hair to be darker, I can afford to give this a little bit darker lines. And also, I need to be careful because there are some lines that I do want to be a little bit thinner. I'm going to have to get more ink. So I don't know if you can see on the camera, but this is just an eyedropper tool. It came with the ink bottle, so like you scoop up the ink with that and drop some onto the dip pen. Or you can dip it in, but this satisfies my urge to be neat. All right. You'll notice that sometimes I'm pausing before I draw. I'm trying to envision exactly how I want the line to look and what I want the ink to do. Inking is something that takes a lot of patience, a lot of practice, because you can't erase this. If I make a mistake, that's it. You can cover it up, but that doesn't always work.
With your extra ball, you're going to create all of your attachments. So you would be making your wheel. Do we need more water? So we need it to have water on the craft. You don't want to rub it in. Yeah, no, it's definitely both. So I agree.
A little bit of spreading that out a bit.
You need to make your wheel.
And then you haven't done
Okay.
Just want to make sure.
I was starting to work on my concept the other day.
Now, the purpose of the sketch is not to tell me exactly where to put my lines. A sketch shouldn't be an exact copy. You shouldn't just be tracing. The sketch tells you where you want the motion to be, where you want the details to be, helps you figure out the proportion of the body underneath. It's mostly there to convey information that you are going to use while you are inking. So, let's this done. Now, a lot of the artists here, myself included, sometimes have a little bit of difficulty talking and drawing at the same time. It's engaging two different parts of the brain, and when you're drawing, you wind up demanding all your energy in just one part of the brain. So the part that handles all the talking and stuff will just sort of shut down. So that tends to happen sometimes. Now this is difficult, this angle of the head. The ear is really important here. What it's doing is telling me where the head is angled and exactly where everything else on the face is. If I drew it backwards so that you could see the curling part of it, it would look as if the person their face was supposed to be facing you. And really their face is facing away, curled up into the blanket or pillow or whatever we've got going on here.
So I will go ahead then, and I have a receipt register. So I will go ahead and stop the phone.
There we go.
Okay. We'll figure it out. Okay, I'll get off the phone and call her right now. And we'll see
Now, I don't want to continue with the hair for too long here because now I'm starting to get into the shoulder.
two of everything. So there should be
This is right about where you need to start being aware of what part of the body goes over and what part of the body goes under.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Bye.
And this is where it's easy to forget. You can't push the pen. With a ballpoint pen, with one of your brush markers that you might get that are Faber-Castell or Copics, you can go ahead and push that around all day long. This is a dip pen though. This nib isn't like synthetic or anything. This is just straight up metal. So if you bend it, it's gonna snap. And if this snaps, well, that's not cool, man, you know? Now this is exciting. Put a little bit of...
There should be plates, Emily, and the there. And you can pick it up. See, look in the drawer. The top drawer. They're all gone.
I get people who sometimes ask me about how I do the folds of clothing like that, and the answer is that it's just years of practice. The most important part is being able to understand the form that happens underneath the body, and then understanding the texture of the clothing. Once you understand how heavy the clothing is supposed to be, or how rounded the body is supposed to be, you just sort of have this habit built up of only doing these sorts of lines to convey that something is being pulled around, or only these sorts of lines to convey that it's folding over itself. It's mostly practice. And that's another reason why the sketch winds up being so important. It informs you about everything that goes on underneath all the clothing and all of the fabric and hair and detail. Uh-oh. Here we go. Like I said, these are not exactly the best nibs. So sometimes what'll happen is that it's just... Whoops. Sometimes what'll happen is that the ink will just not flow. And what winds up happening is, well, I'll put a little bit more on, see what happens there, you know? Let's see if I can find my towel. Now, I don't want, this is the problem sometimes with dip pens. You might not be able to see it because the ink is just so dark, but I'm getting bubbles when I push the ink out of the eyedropper, and that is not Gucci. This isn't Gucci, gang. Ugh.
You're like, you're really good.
Now, the reason that rag looks so nasty and grody is because this stuff doesn't wash out. So I just chose some fabric that I had laying around my apartment that I really don't care about. And if I don't care about it, then I'm not going to mind too much when the ink gets all over it, and I won't be able to wash it out. Now, this is one of the places where I didn't actually draw too much detail. I figured that when the time came and I was drawing, I would just go ahead and wing it. Right here where the hair, this area here, you can tell there's not a whole lot of detail going on. So let me go ahead and add some detail. Now, the fun part about hair, especially when it's laying out like this, is that it just goes absolutely everywhere. So you get a lot of like freedom with what you can do with your hair. I have to be careful though, because right now the ink is flowing pretty thick off of my nib, and I don't want my hair to be the darkest thing on this drawing. Generally, when you're inking and you're trying to look at something that is dark and you're trying to look at something that is light, my rule of thumb is that things that are farther away are going to be lighter, things that are closer are going to be darker. And you also have to take into account the natural color of things too. So if this person's hair is blonde, it's going to be lighter colored than if this person's hair was brunette. When your person here is all on the same plane and you don't have anything that is really farther away, what's going to happen is just about everything will have their line thickness determined by whether or not it's dark or light. And everybody's got hair on the back of their neck like that too. It's pretty normal, unless you know go to a barber and get that nice and clean cut off. This person, no, they don't go to a barber. You can kind of hear the noises of the studio going on. It's a busy studio. We got a lot of people who come in and make stuff. Posted a photo to Instagram a little bit earlier, just a little bit before this stream. I was in the kiln room going to look for something, and I saw the kiln firing, and that's the big kiln. Now, she's my favorite because she's big, she's powerful. And when she's firing at her highest temperature, you can see from little cracks that everything is glowing really bright, like looking directly into a supernova. That's my favorite. So I love to go in there. I love working with the kiln.
I just don't want it to be out there
Yeah, no, I understand.
because of all the writing on it, and then we can check it all in according to the packing slip. Oh, Emily's doing it now,
This is another one of those areas I didn't actually sketch very much. I left it a little more open to interpretation so that I could figure out what I was doing as I was doing it. So let me see. Now, one of the things that I wish that I had for this drawing was Copics, or Copics, or however they're pronounced. I've heard people do it both ways. But I haven't really practiced with them very much, and they're very expensive. So I'm thinking of looking into just getting more generic alcohol markers and see what happens when I practice with those. That's probably a Christmas wish list kind of idea because I'm not sure if I really have the ability to go out and get those for myself. With socks that don't fit very well.
Oh, Emily,
I don't actually know too many people who sleep with socks on.
Emily, for the small pieces that they're.
But I'll be honest, the reason that I am drawing socks on is because I don't like drawing
only the
feet.
moose needed that hole.
So why would I make myself draw something that I don't want to draw, you know? So this is the person's jaw right here. You can't really see it much though. I have a lot of concerns about this area here because you can't really tell where the head is facing, but you can see a lot where the hair is going. So I'm trying to define this part of the hair a little bit more. Well, I ran out of ink, so we'll deal with that when the time comes up. And the time is now. So, thinking, I've done this to some of my other Inktober drawings so far, but I'm thinking about going ahead and doing an ink wash to help emphasize some of the hues and the values, and to give it a little bit more motion. And while I am thinking about that, I need to be mindful while I ink. Where am I going to place the values? And is the boldness of my line going to emphasize that? Because I can't put a nice dark ink wash someplace where there's just a very light ink line. I gotta have congruence between the two. So, because I'm thinking about that, I'm going to go ahead and start adding in some dark little scribbles up and down where I know that I want to have more emphasis. In this case, since this is the bottom line of the border, I'm just adding in more ink. I can also switch to another nib that allows me a bigger variation or a bolder line, but I haven't washed any of my other nibs yet, and I don't want to take the time, get up, and go and find the Windex. You might have seen that in the outpost that I was using this blue liquid. That's just glass cleaner. You can use that to wipe off the oils that come on newly opened nibs and oils that come from your fingers when you accidentally touch the nib. Usually before I draw, I just go ahead and wash it off with a little bit of glass cleaner and some warm water, just to ensure that all the oils are off. And then when I finish drawing, I only ever wash it with a little bit of warm water. I don't know if that's standard practice, but that's the way I was taught, so that's the way I keep doing it. I can't really tell the difference between the shirt and the pants here. So I'm thinking what I might do is add a little bit of a pattern. And to do that, I'm going to want really light ink. And I'm thinking, let's do something Halloween. The thing about patterns that you have to keep in mind is where the pattern is going to go, whether or not it follows the curve of the body, and how it follows the curve of all the wrinkles that we just put on here. That's part of what makes drawing fabric so difficult. It's not an exact science, but you just sort of get a hold of it. Now, I apologize if y'all are chatting and I can't see you right now, but I am focusing on all of these little things. You can sort of see that I followed a curve here. That's because most of the time when you see someone who's wearing pajama pants or sleep pants and they have a pattern on it, they're really just sort of following the curve of this body. And in this case, they're following the curve of the thigh. You can kind of think of the thigh as like a really long oval shape. And so this is just following that oval shape. Well, you can think of this person's thigh as an oval shape. There are people out there who have thighs that are more like cylinders, and people out there who have very angular thighs, you know. But for all its complexity, when you're drawing the human body, it's okay if you start off with just one stereotype of the body and then just sort of branch outward once you're comfortable. Because the body is a really, really complex thing to draw. Now you notice I kind of messed up that skull and drew a line through it. I just went ahead and made a wrinkle so it makes it look like the skull is supposed to be that way. That's the thing about drawing. If you act like it was supposed to be that way, nobody's ever going to know. When I was in a fine arts class, it was drawing, life drawing. I messed things up all the time. I was not good at still life, and I just couldn't get the hang of it. But if I went ahead and said, yeah, this is supposed to be wonky, this is supposed to represent the distorted vision that we have of this or that, I got perfect grades. Because you know what? Nobody knew except me. Hopefully my art professor's not watching this. She'll be a little bit mad at me. Now, because of the wrinkles here, all the little skull patterns are nice and crunched up, so I am actually just drawing rough lines that don't really make a skull. It's because once things start getting all squished together like that, the human eye has a hard time telling it apart, so it's not going to make too much of a difference whether or not I get the skulls correct. There's really not much room for perfectionism when it comes to art. There you go. See, now it looks like everything is all bunched up here, and it gives it the illusion of being more 3D than it actually is.
Oh, how cool. I'm trying it.
So let's go ahead. All right. I think I'm just about ready for my wash. So, a wash is a really fun thing to do. I just need to go get my water cup real quick. It'll give me just a hot moment. Ow.
Can you stop it, Gabe?
No, I'm coming back.
Oh, okay.
I just needed my water cup. I try to leave the water cup away from everything else because it is full of water. And this is not watercolor paper. So what I can do is put a little bit of water down on it. But I can't just dump the whole thing in water. But I'm going to show you something. This is the pen I was just using. I love doing that. All right. So this is just water and ink. It's the water that I use to wash my ink nibs off. And when you're doing a wash, it's a little like watercolor. You start with your water here, and you spread it out as much as you can. I like to use a flat brush with this, but it's entirely personal preference. So what you wind up with is a really dark sort of color here that sort of fades out the farther you go. That gives you a much softer appearance. Or, of course, you can just do this. And, oh yeah, we spread in. We spread in wash. We spread in. It's an ink wash. It's you. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of dark color here. And if I go ahead and just sort of pile on all the ink right there, it'll make it look darker. Now this part of it is dried already. Or a little bit, at least. It looked like it dried. I was wrong. It didn't dry. But what I'm going to do is put on more ink, and that shades it even darker. Yeah, mind blown. That's the basics of an ink wash. So to get ready to do that ink wash, I'm going to go ahead and erase all the pencil lines that I made here. I spread the ink. You can see that I had overestimated how dry my ink was. And with my eraser, I just smeared it all over the drawing. Oh well. Get rid of all the eraser shavings. Let's see if I can cover that up with ink wash. Now this is just, Higgins Black Magic waterproof ink. It's basic stuff. You can get it at Michael's. I think I got mine at Walmart. You'll notice it's already looking a little bit darker. What I'm going to do is let that dry, come back to that area later and darken it up. I'm going to make this person's hair dark too, because I want to see if I can emphasize this hair part here. Not sure if I can, but I can give it a shot. Don't tisk at me. I'm doing my best out here. Oh, I'm getting to some really thin areas here, so I'm going to switch to a smaller paintbrush. But for the most part, I like using the square ones. Helps me shade a little bit easier. This is a pretty light ink wash. So what I can do is, if I really want it to darken up a little bit faster, is drop a little more ink in here and mix it in. But for now, I'm going to start with something really light because I want to do light shadows and work my way down. I did this with Outpost, if I remember correctly. I did not do this with Rodent, but looking back, I probably should have. It would have been really fun. And I'm planning on doing this when I live stream RIP or RIP. It could be either or. We'll see which way I take it when I actually do that here. What is it? Thursday? Friday? Yeah, I'm going to do that Friday. So that is going to be exciting. I hope y'all tune in.
Oh, put that way on top of the other one.
See, this is a little too light now. Because what I'm trying to do is emphasize the curve of the bed. What I'm going to do is just 1 drop of ink. 2 drops of ink, 3 drops. This is powerful stuff, kind of like food coloring, so you only need a little bit at a time. All right. Let's see how it looks. There we go. That's a little bit darker. That's what I wanted.
I need to come in and see. Fun.
Oh, yeah. I'm doing the ink wash now.
Well, right now, Emma and I are getting in all the cool new pottery for the live sale.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that looks fabulous. All right.
I'm almost done.
Fun.
This is all about just finishing it up now. So, I'm gonna go light again, because now I'm just gonna add a little bit of dimension to the body. I know that this is all curled up on the inside, so that's probably gonna be darker. I know this is right on the edge. So we'll go ahead and color that one in. And I know that I wanted this darker. With watercolor and ink washes, sometimes you just have to trust the water to work its way out. Trust the process. See, I like the flat brush because it gives me a lot of control over the shape of the lines I make. And also because I draw some pretty precise lines. And the ink brush that I'm using right now, the square one, it's not so precise. It creates some expression where my lines did not. The reason for that is usually my ink lines are defining the shape very precisely. But my shadow is more adding motion and adding contrast and value. And I like having both because the ink wash can sort of give me some strength where I struggle with my lines. It's all about knowing your weaknesses and just working with them, not being so angry about the fact that you have them. Okay. This whole leg is actually under the first leg, so it all got shaded in. But I'm going back and adding a second layer of shadows to give it more volume, more form. And here we go. Someone who is nice and fast asleep on their bed. This is the last part of any drawing. Signing it.
So if you're gonna do it, I would make your ankles close to the head.
Sleep. So if you're in the area of Orlando or somewhere near Central Florida, or if you're thinking about taking a vacation down here, you can always come down to the studio, and we've got all of our Inktober drawings set up on our back wall. And everybody who has done their Inktober drawings, they have it all set up there. And of course, as Miss Victoria mentioned, we've got a nice fancy little live sale where we sell a lot of our pottery and pottery related accessories. Feel free to tune into that. Get yourself something nice. Get yourself something bougie, you know, treat yourself. And there you have it. This is Gabe, Super Awesome Cool Pottery, doing Inktober for the 21st. Sleep. Thanks for tuning in, y'all.